Hello and welcome to Snyder's Return, a tabletop role-playing podcast. My guest today has sent parties to the frozen north, driven the Paizo fantasy wagon train to the stars, and painted the fortress red. Her successes have come as a writer, designer, editor, and developer, and whose role as editorial director begs the question of just how many kobolds are needed to operate the press. Joining me today is creative and editorial tour de force Amanda Hamon. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm glad we've managed to sort of arrange to speak with each other.
Yes, we had a couple of false starts there, so I really appreciate your patience as everything in the Warrens careens out of control in the middle of a Kickstarter project that's actually finishing tomorrow. So your patience is
there you go. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Well, before we touch on to current and future projects and things you've worked on, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got into tabletop role-playing games, please?
Oh my goodness, all the way back to how I got into tabletop role-playing games. I
Yes,
see how you are.
yes, please.
Okay, well, I'm really old, so I'm going to have to think about it for a second. No, I've been playing tabletop RPGs since I was about 16 years old. I started with 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. It was actually right after the change over to 3.5. So I had some friends, several of whom were several years older than me, who had whole libraries of 3rd edition books, and they had finally made the decision to change over to 3.5, and that's when I got brought into the group. So luckily for me, I was a very poor teenager without any kind of money or resources of my own, but I did have these older friends who had libraries of books at their disposal. So in those early days, I spent a long time in my friend's basement going through various different publications and really just getting a sense of wonder and excitement that I had finally found a game that felt like it was really tailored toward me in the way that I was interested in stories and fantasy and backgrounds and coming up with my own ideas, and that D&D really allowed me to apply those interests and skills into killing things and taking their stuff and having really interesting backstories for my characters. And I was one of those people who wrote, a 3,000 word short story about where my character came from before the play started, and nobody cared and it never came up. But it was really fun for me. So I did that in high school for a long time, and actually that campaign ended up going over a decade and ended after I got hired as a full-time developer on Pathfinder 1st edition at Paizo. So that was a very fruitful campaign for me. But I got into other types of role-playing games in my college years. I played lots and lots of D10 games, a lot of World of Darkness games. I'm a big horror fan, a big gothic literature and pop culture fan as well. So I played tons of vampire and werewolf and mage and changeling and things like that. And then just, sort of branched out from there, but I always really felt very much at home at the role-playing table, whether it was playing characters or later on graduating to running little games here and there, actually several sort of ongoing campaigns after a while that I had going. And then I got into freelance writing because I was a journalist right after I graduated college, and really sort of discovered that it wasn't necessarily going to be the right long-term career for me. I was unhappy for a number of reasons. The industry itself was in a lot of turmoil. I worked very hard and worked for a number of different publications, including like the Indianapolis Star and a couple of other larger news outlets and newswire services. But, I really wanted to be able to apply the skills that I had professionally in writing and critical thinking and just like storytelling and world building, which was something that was a personal passion, into a career that I was interested in. So I went around Gen Con around, 2010, 2011, handing out my business card to folks and saying, hey, I'm a professional writer, I'm a professional editor. And I've been playing role-playing games for, even a long time at that point. Who would like to hire me as a freelance writer? And, that went not so well and very well in some cases. And on the very well end of that was with Wes Schneider, who was at the time editor-in-chief of Paizo. It was the first year that I had met him there, and Wes really opened the door for me when I explained to him who I was and what I was interested in and what my experience in role-playing games were. He said, that they didn't have freelance editors, which was true at the time, but he said, are you interested in game design? And me, being a very sort of agreeable kind of journalist type, was just like, sure, of course I'll try that. While in the back of my head thinking, I am going to fail miserably and this is going to be awful, but I guess at least I'll try. Never really having thought that game design was an option for me, for, just a number of different reasons. It hadn't occurred to me. So that was my very first sort of foray into that, and I met other publishers that year. Wolfgang Bauer was somebody that I met through various contacts, who is the publisher and Kobold in Chief over at Kobold Press, my current job. So that relationship goes back all of those years as well. And really just kind of went from there. I wrote for Pathfinder First Edition, and worked my way from adventure path monsters and back matter, to rules elements, to campaign setting material, and then larger adventures eventually. And just sort of made lots of contacts, got lots of experience. And then when an assistant developer job opened up in 2015 at Paizo, I applied, not really thinking it was going to go that far, because I figured there were many other people who were far more experienced than me. But I ended up getting hired and went through many different iterations of working on Pathfinder, and then Starfinder, and then a little bit of Pathfinder Second Edition, and then Starfinder again, and just continued to sort of widen my scope and my breadth, and here I am.
Wow. That's quite
I feel like I've talked forever. I'm so sorry.
no, not at all. I mean, I was there at Gen Con with you for a moment. It felt like it. I mean, that's an amazing life to have led within the sort of the tabletop role playing sort of community and things like that. It begs 1,000 questions, but you said you worked on Pathfinder First Edition and then the Starfinder stuff. So, what was it like taking that sort of fantasy framework that Pathfinder has and sort of taking that off-world, as it was? What was it like working on creating that side of the Paizo output?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And a very short version is that it's really hard to go from high fantasy, Tolkien style role playing, and high fantasy, medieval style settings in the way that just a generic fantasy tends to be, and switch that over into what the brief was for Starfinder, which was a far future science fantasy, very very unique actually campaign setting. They're very very different from each other from a flavor perspective, but also when you're working on these properties as a creative, your entire sort of thinking needs to shift, right? I never really realized how rooted I was in that high fantasy, dragons and fighters and wizards and sorcerers and elves and dwarves fighting and all of that stuff. I never really realized how core that was to the things that I was creating until I went into another environment and just kind of dropped straight into the deep end and realized, wow, my entire perspective needs to change. And I think the first time that it really hit me was when, very early on in the Starfinder process, before the full design team was even assembled, so before it was even decided, who's going to be, the rules co-creators, which I did end up being, but at the time did not know that. There was an order to write a bunch of brand new spells, and it was like, we're going to be the Pathfinder rules team at the time was like, well, we're going to be doing a first pass at a conversion of some core Pathfinder spells. Some magic missile, and blur, and some of these more iconic D&D type spells, but we really want there to be some very unique, not ported, not analoged Starfinder spells. So we need, I think it was like 10,000 words. We need 10,000 words of that. And that was my assignment. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, well, all of my understanding of magic, which has been a passion of mine going way back, is very rooted in that Vancian style, high fantasy type of casting. And so what I did was I really stepped back and I took some significant time to catalog what my own fandom looked like from a science fiction perspective. Which turns out I was happy to find, like, oh, I actually do know a lot about various science fiction settings. I'm a big Star Wars fan, especially the Old Republic in those types of settings. I'm a big Firefly fan. There's lots of, I love space horror, of super into the Dead Space series, and there's been comic spin-offs and anime spin-offs and things like that. So I had a pretty wide breadth of fan knowledge of these things, and so I thought, okay, all right, so let's sort of think back to what is it that I find cool about these settings, what is it that's fun, that's interesting and unique to this flavor of fantasy. And then I just spent, I think I set my timer for 20 minutes, and I just wrote down as many crazy ideas as I could for different types of spells that would be far future science fantasy things that would never have come out of D&D. Some of them were technology related, some of them were sort of just like energy and entropy and force of the universe oriented and things like that. And that was really when my brain turned over. And I thought, okay, this is what I've got to do. I've got to take myself out of that D&D Pathfinder mindset and put myself into what is this setting and what is it able to do. And it was a little bit of a changeover, but that was how that was accomplished.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm so in sort of enraptured in it. And when you mentioned one of your influences was, or one of your science fiction likes, it was Firefly, my mind lit up then, because every time I look at Starfinder, in the back of my mind something to me says Firefly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Those influences run very deep. Various members of the Starfinder team are big fans of certain franchises. Firefly, I think I was probably the biggest Firefly fan, and you might see that reflected in the fact that Navasi, the iconic envoy, has got some threads of Mal Reynolds flowing throughout her, right? She's a unique character, and I don't know how familiar you are with her, but I actually wrote her backstory and her stats as an iconic, and I very much had the sense of let's have this anti-heroic, really kind of scrappy, good-hearted but very much a scoundrel type of character, and build from that sort of seed and see what comes out of that. And I know that Firefly very much influenced that.
Oh, absolutely. And so the Starfinder has had it's got a starter box been released or being released very soon, and so people should definitely sort of go out and get that. While I mention that, actually, about going and getting things, where can people find you?
Find me. So I'm primarily on Twitter as my public social media, and that's at Amanda Hamon, spelled just like my name. I'm on there fairly frequently. I have times where I kind of have to do a deep dive to get something done, or just to take a little bit of a break. But for the most part, I'm pretty there. And I posted dumb stuff. I just post a bunch of dumb stuff. I don't know if you've been through my Twitter at all, but it's very much just whatever weird thing I'm working on, whatever thought kind of comes to mind, and whatever folks are saying at the time. It's not necessarily the most official thing in the world, but it's the one that I think is best to put out there for folks.
I shamelessly had trawled through your Twitter, trying to sort of find some information and some.
Sorry.
Not at all. Some pointed questions, which leads us on to the Kickstarter you mentioned a little earlier. I think
Sure.
before we started recording, and we'll touch on that, or we'll get to that shortly. But so 3.5 D&D, Pathfinder, Starfinder. You never left D&D entirely, though, having worked on something quite recently. Would you mind sort of taking us through your involvement with a more recent Dungeons and Dragons project, please?
Hint, 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 hint. I see what you're about. Okay, you want to talk about Rime of the Frost Maiden, don't you?
I would like to talk about your involvement with Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Sure, yeah. So my involvement with Rime of the Frost Maiden, and I know this because I just recently came across an invoice to realize that I completed the work a little more than a year ago at this point. And at that time, it was a project that I was brought in to work on from, of course, some of the folks on the D&D team over there. And a couple of my close friends who are also freelancers in the business also worked on that book. And in our case, that was Crystal Frazier and Jessica Price. We were credited as members of the world building team on that book, which is pretty accurate. What I ended up doing was going into the wizard's office on at least one occasion and having a creative meeting in which we were throwing around ways to deepen the 10 Towns setting in specific, 10 Towns up in Icewind Dale, up near the spine of the world, and just talk about what sort of like setting implications and themes and seeds and fun secrets that we could hint at that we could build into this version of 10 Towns. And it was a really great experience. There's lots of wonderful creatives involved in that. Chris Perkins and Kate Welch were in that meeting as well. And it was a very just kind of free form, everybody's ideas are on the table. Let's talk about what we can do. And so we had that discussion, and there's some cool stuff, that sort of came out of that. And I definitely threw ideas out there that I thought like, oh my God, this is never going to go anywhere, but we'll just see what happens. We'll let them say no, which is one of my approaches that I'm always sort of surprised when they work. Because especially as managing developer for Starfinder, I would throw out these ideas and just be like, and this and that, and what about mechs on Dimalco? And we could have mechs in the new technology book. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Thinking, nobody's going to want to do these things. Okay, let's have a class called a Witch Warper that is entirely about the theory of infinite worlds, pulling magic from the various incarnations of reality, and that's how he gains his power. Thinking, oh my God, that's so nerdy. No one's going to want that. And it turns out that in all of those occasions, the folks who were also working on the project went, no, that's a fun idea. Let's go with that. So that was what the experience was like at Wizards as well. Throwing out ideas that were super cool, having there be like a diabolic taint that's involved in one of the towns up there. That was me. So sorry for when your players get murdered by unexpected ice devils. So that's what that was like. We had the meeting, and then I went back and we had taken some notes, but then it was all sort of up to me to spin up some what I think at the time was thought to be used for like a writer's guide, like an IP Bible for the Forgotten Realms. And then it turns out that material was actually put into Rime of the Frost Maiden, and getting credit in that book was super cool. So yeah, I'm really happy with the way that process turned out and the way that material ended up getting used in that book, because at the time I wasn't really sure where we were going.
Yeah, you're just throwing stuff and see what sticks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So it was a cool process, and I'm very grateful to have been involved.
And you sort of stuck with the D25E sort of system, and in a relationship that you mentioned starting way back at Gen Con, you joined the Kobold Press. Are you able to sort of fill us in a bit more about how things have been during your current employment there?
Yeah, totally. So me being the editorial director of Cobalt Press is, I would say, a culmination of a freelance relationship with Wolfgang and all the folks over there that did start back in some of those early Gen Cons. So before I got hired at Paizo in 2015, I was a lead editor and developer for Kobold Press. I don't know if you remember this, but some folks might remember that Kobold Press used to be a first edition Pathfinder publisher, not exclusively, but primarily. That was what was being put out around that time, around the 2012 to 2015 time period. And so there was a book that Wolfgang was putting together called Deep Magic. And there's a 5th edition version of Deep Magic now, which might ring a bell. But back then, it was a Pathfinder first edition book that started out conceptually as being a collection of all of the magic, including some of the setting, sort of base magic in Midgard, which is the Kobold Press proprietary setting, but just magic that had been published in various PDFs on the blogs and other various books, and bringing all of that together and maybe adding a few things here and there for cohesiveness, but it was just going to be a compilation of that. And this ended up being the first Kickstarter project that Kobold Press worked on, and the reception to it, especially at that time, really blew everybody out of the water. I thought I was signing on for editing a fairly thin volume of mostly pickup work and doing development on a little bit of new things. Turns out that project ended up making $126,000 and like tripled in size, and we had this massive hit, but also all of this massive work on our hands. So so I really kind of got thrown into the deep end there and plowed through it and got lots of great experience. Did lots of learned lots of things. And, so I was the lead editor and developer on that book. That process happened again for another book called Southlands, which was a first edition Pathfinder campaign setting book. And I worked on other various projects for Kobold, but it turns out that ended up becoming what was basically my resume for Paizo. When I got hired, I already had all of this experience doing the exact same job, but for a different
Hmm.
company. uh, and so now that this opportunity came up, which I just took in July, it was, it was a great sort of way of kind of coming home. And there's a lot of passion that's involved in making the Cobalt Press products. It's still very, very fan driven. It originally started out as a company, called Open Design, that was about sort of collaborative design and having patrons that were backing passion projects and things like that. And so those bones and that DNA still very much there. And everybody I work with is a pretty close friend of mine. And so it's, definitely ramped up in the level of publications that are happening and the amount of output that's happening. But I'm happy to be up for the task.
Well, that's fair enough. And you mentioned their publications, Kickstarters, and things like that. And I
Yes.
alluded to it in the intro about painting the fortress red. Are you able to tell us a bit more about the Scarlet Citadel?
Absolutely. Yes, that is our until tomorrow, which is Friday, October 16th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. That is our current Kickstarter. However, it does end tomorrow, October 16th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So that is a classic style dungeon crawl adventure that is written by a gentleman named Steve Winter, who has written lots and lots of things for Wizards of the Coast in previous editions of the game, but also the current edition of the game. I believe he was a co-author on Hoard of the Dragon Queen, if I'm not mistaken, along with Wolfgang. And it's a very cool sort of called back to some of those old school types of adventures in which it is a dungeon crawl, but there's lots of plots that are woven throughout the various levels, lots of themes and different terrain that are represented. There's one big bad guy who is really cool, and every time Steve talks about him, I'm just like more intrigued to find out exactly, what different PC groups will do once they come across him. But yeah, it's very fun. In fact, there are a lot of echoes of Temple of Elemental Evil, which is a second edition module that you may or may not recognize. But it's set up in that same way, in which there's this big dungeon complex, and nearby is a town in which adventurers can camp and get various supplies and learn things about the history of the area. And that town is called Red Tower, which is the Hamlet analog if we're talking Temple of Elemental Evil.
Hmm.
And it's really fun and it's simple in some of the best ways, I think.
All right. Well, I'm more familiar with the Temple of Elemental Evil because of Matt Colville and his use of
Mm,
that adventure to illustrate points through his. Anyway, that's off topic. He's a
yeah.
interesting and great person I'd love to speak to in the future. Again, that's off topic, but he's an inspiration in his own way. So yeah, so I am sort of familiar with what you're going for, and I think you're right about the writing credits for your for the previously mentioned authors there. So you've written this, or you're part of the Scarlet Citadel from Kobold Press, and all these other things that you've got going on. Tell me about your writing process. You mentioned there about Starfinder and a few of the Pathfinder things and D&D about just sort of throwing up ideas out. When you want to sit and write something, or when you if you want to answer a slightly different question, when you approach the editing side of things,
Mm.
what's the process you use? How do you get into that sort of creative mind space?
Yeah, well, I think the simplest answer to that is that I just always have so many ideas that are all over the place for so many different things. And so it's less of trying to come up with something and more where does this fit? What types of products are available? What assignments am I looking at? The RPG business is very, very assignment based, right? So you've got, the developer um, of a project going to different writers who they think would be good for specific types of writing. And you sort of work with them through that. it's very rare that there's like an unsolicited suggestion, even from a very prominent and established author, that goes to a company, and the company just goes, "Oh, okay, well, write that and we'll publish it,"
Hmm.
because it's largely just a function of schedules and boring things like revenue flow and things like that. You sort of pick through assignments that are available and go with one. So it's very much about a process that I like, which is fitting your my crazy ideas and fun inspirations and things that I would like to accomplish creatively into assignments that that I think I would be good at, or that folks approach me and ask me if I would be good at, or
Hmm.
if I would be interested, that sort of thing. So yeah, so it's about having lots and lots of different ideas and kind of fitting them into a product that makes sense for what's in front of me.
Okay. I was sort of the maybe I worded the question badly. For example, James Haight uses like a page outline to help
Mm,
him sort of nudge
okay.
himself through writing. Ashley Warren uses sort of picture walls to sort of help draw out creativity and inspiration before she puts pen to paper or ink onto the computer screen.
Oh,
I was
absolutely.
just your creative process, how you take these informations, assignments, deadlines, revenue streams, and all that sort of stuff, and how you put that down to something that you would have a first draft of, or something
Okay.
similar.
Yeah, I understand now. No, I'm sorry about that. So once the
That's
assignment is
right.
there, how do you spin up that idea, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, absolutely. So I would say that I definitely use levels of outlines, if that makes sense. I look at what the sort of general brief of the writing is, and I'm an adventure writer at heart, so I'm going to be thinking about this in terms of a fairly lengthy adventure usually. I'm looking at, okay, where is it taking place? What types of themes are involved? Is it one adventure as part of a series of linked adventures, like an adventure path volume, for example? And I write out a very vague, sort of high level outline of the story progression. And I approach everything in a narrative way when it comes to adventure writing. So, I'll do that. And that's often by hand. That's in a moleskin, notebook where, I look at what the assignment is and what the developer outline is. And so I've got the basics in my mind. And then I sketch out, what would be like a character brief, but for the entire adventure. And I write that by hand. And then I'll think on that for a little while and kind of think of various details that I could fit in there, and then I will expand that outline into something that's digital, so something in a Word file, and that will be maybe a couple of pages. And usually at that point, I will start building in, okay, what encounters are we looking at, and looking at all of the number crunching, like what levels does it need to cover, how much experience is involved, what kind of treasure are we looking at, again, where's it set? So what sort of monsters are appropriate? What challenge levels should these encounters be? And building the bones there. And then that expanded outline, I will continue to fill details in until that grows to be several pages. And that's the foundational document that then I use, and I usually start chronologically from the beginning of an adventure, and I just write all the way through. There might be some cases where I'll write through, and then there will be like a bunch of stats that are needed or something, so I'll just put a placeholder there. But in general, I don't really skip around. I just like sit and I just power through the entire thing.
Wow, wow. Fair play, fair play. Uh, yeah, thank you for giving us that sort of insight into how you approach the creative challenge of adventure writing and things like that,
Mm.
which sort of leads to the opposite end of the spectrum. So your work with Kobold Press, the stuff you've done with D&D and Pathfinder, Starfinder, and that sort of stuff. That could be it could be a lot of work, or is a lot of work. Again, I only see snapshots of your life through Twitter and things like that. But what is it you do for downtime? How do you take time for yourself away from the creative process?
Yeah, yeah, I do. And quarantine has obviously changed that situation. It used to be that if I would get a little bit overwhelmed or just need to kind of take a step back, I would go out and do stuff. I just have fun, and I like all kinds of weird things. Like I have in the past couple years been really into like indie WWE style wrestling, these events that I live in Seattle, so there's a league here, and
Mm.
have some friends that I would go out to stuff like that, and I'm really into like live theater, for example, so going out to see a play. I also like the opera. I like lots of different things, and so going out and experiencing art in its many beautiful various forms was a big outlet for me. And so, it has been somewhat difficult to cope in that those are not options really anymore. But I mean, I've always been a tabletop player. I've always loved RPGs, and so I'm actually playing more RPGs now. Well, I guess I'm not really playing more RPGs now than I did before, but it's more consistent now, and it's all shifted online. So I'm currently running a Saturday Pathfinder First Edition game that has been going since the end of March, and I think we've only missed like 2 weeks because turns out when everybody is staying at home, there's lots of time and conflicts don't necessarily come up
That's
for
fair. That's
writing.
fair.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm doing that. I'm playing in a Sunday game. I have a Tuesday streamed game that doesn't necessarily always happen, but that's a Starfinder game.
Mm.
And then a Thursday Pathfinder Second Edition game. So I game 3 to 4 days out of the week now, which now that I think about it is about the same, maybe a little bit more than I have been doing before. But
Mm.
it's really been much more sort of grounding and a nice outlet for
Nice.
stepping back from everything.
Yeah, no, that's nice. That's it's good that you still have that consistency and sort of communication and outlet, as it were.
Yeah. Okay.
A question that you say you're playing more consistently, sort of tabletop games and things like that. Are there any tabletop games, and you mentioned World of Darkness and things like that, that if you had a chance to play frequently or maybe more regularly, or even just something that's caught your eye outside of the sort of the Paizo Wizards bracket, what would you look to play?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Like so many people, there are so many games and never enough time. So there's always stuff that that's like, oh, I'd really love to play that. I would really, really like to get into an ongoing Call of Cthulhu game, just because I've played some Call of Cthulhu, but I've not been in a long, sustained ongoing campaign, and I just would really like to. I hope that opportunity comes up at some point. There was one that was going to start that I was going to be in, and it just didn't happen. So I'm just kind of hoping and waiting, and maybe that's the next thing that I run. When my Saturday game runs out, that would be fun. I've picked up a number of other different type of RPGs over the past couple of years that I'd love to play. I've got things from the Flood, which is I think it's from Free League. Hopefully, I'm not
Yeah,
mistaking that.
Free League or Free League Publishing. Yeah.
Yeah. I picked that up at UK Games Expo a couple of years ago, and have really been interested in trying to run something in that setting with those roles for a while. So I played in a Blades in the Dark game that was really, really, really fun a little while ago, and I wouldn't mind putting together like a homebrew game for that. So there's a bunch of stuff that's up there, but those are probably the main ones.
All right. That's some interesting and good choices there. Definitely, definitely. So we've spoken about how you do what you do, and who you do what you do for, and what you do when you don't want to do what you do, or you want to take a break from it. But what if someone wants to emulate what you do? And I know everybody's route into the tabletop role playing game community, from a professional standpoint, is slightly different. But if someone was to look to get into writing, say for one of the outlets that you've worked for, or maybe get into the editing side of stuff, what advice would you give them, given now your years of experience within the field?
Yeah, so honestly, having the foundation of professional skills, I think is really what worked out the best for me, or what really certainly accelerated my trajectory throughout the industry. And it was just, it was having professional writing experience, even though mine was nowhere near role playing games. It really taught me the basics of word count and deadline and writing to spec and communicating with editors and just understanding the way that that process works. Not only the way that the process works, but why those things are important and why ghosting your editor or not communicating or turning over something that is twice the word count of what it's supposed to. Why those things are really big deals. You run into a lot of folks without experience who will, for example, turn over a manuscript that's much longer than it's supposed to be, or includes elements that the developer didn't ask for, or changes a major part of the outline, and they say, "Oh well, but it's better this way." But what they don't know is what the rest of the project looks like, and the fact that they've now just duplicated something that another author has created and the developer has to rewrite it, or there's word count limits and there's no way any of that will fit. And again, the developer has to rewrite it. And everything in role playing operates on such a razor thin line when it comes to timelines, that anything done to make the developer's life harder, cause more work for them, is going to incentivize that developer to not want to work with you. So my biggest advice is just learn how to do those things and why those things are important, and be somebody that a developer leans on. Even getting to that point, which I totally skipped past, can be beneficial to you if you've got that writing experience, if you've got a business card, with the words writer or editor or communications or something on it, can really, can really sort of telegraph to folks that you are a professional, you can be relied on. You are treating it like a business. You're not, just necessarily a fan who's looking to get their pet thing published. That's something you absolutely can do in this business, but it comes much later. When, for example, you're the managing developer of Starfinder and you propose a quest concept that's absolutely ridiculous, and it turns out that it gets published. So that's my advice: is be a professional. Keep in mind that jobs are very few and far between when it comes to full time. Go through the freelance sort of gauntlet, get as much experience as you can to make yourself the best candidate that you can when a job does come up.
All right. Well, thank you very much for offering that out, from drawing from your experiences and sort of sharing that with us. That's
Yeah.
hopefully really going to sort of benefit and focus in people that are listening to this podcast. So we've spoken about a number of different topics. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to mention or bring to the fore?
No, I mean, I think we've covered lots and lots of different things. I've got lots of experience with it all over the place, but mostly, I feel very lucky and very fortunate that I've gotten the opportunities that I've gotten, and that I've been able to make a living at this business, which is very fun, and lots and lots of passionate folks, and some of the smartest folks in the world, are my colleagues. So it's just a great opportunity, and to be able to talk with folks like you, I do feel very fortunate. So I'd like to mention that.
Oh, thank you. So you mentioned talk to me. Would you like to remind everybody where they can go and, well, hopefully not disturb you too much, but where they can go and find you and sort of engage with you and the content that you work on, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can primarily find me on Twitter. I am at Amanda Hamon, spelled just like my name, and I talk about my projects, and just funny things that I'm thinking about or prepping for my game, or the weird stuff that players are doing, or just nerd things. So find me there. And, you can find my work all over the place, including Kobold Press and Paizo for Starfinder and Pathfinder, and lots of other different places. So, but if you want to keep up on what I'm currently working on, Twitter is the best place.
All right. Well, thank you so very much for taking some time out of your busy, creative, incredibly busy, creative day, life, existence to sort of take some time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank
you, Adam.
That's all right. With the world ever changing, I'd love to have you on again in the future if you'd be willing.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be more than happy. Just let me know.
Absolutely. We will keep in contact. Well, thank you, Amanda, for coming on and speaking to me. And I will look to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about the show, then go to www.snydersreturn.squarespace.com. returnsnyder.com. Alternatively, you can find us over on Twitter at returnsnyder. We have a Linktree link in the description of this episode. And if you want to support us, come and join us over on Patreon, and we also have a Discord server. Please leave us a review, because we'd love to learn how to improve the channel and provide better content out for those who are listening. Until we speak again, thank you.